Hey leaders, in this episode of Leading Collaborative Response, we are joined by the leadership team at Sir Wilfrid Laurier School in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. We are going to unpack how they've structured their collaborative response efforts with a high degree of fidelity and what they consider to be the one thing that has had the greatest impact on collaborative response in their school. So let's get started.
Are you a leader who is navigating the nuances of leading collaborative response in your school or district? Are you unsure of what collaborative response is? Are you looking to understand the critical role leadership plays when establishing and refining a collaborative response approach?
Collaborative response began as a grassroots approach to focus on the needs of students through a framework of collaboration. That approach has grown to a movement that is training leadership and education.
Through the Leading Collaborative Response podcast, Kurtis and I share our own experiences of leading collaborative response and lessons learned as we continue to learn and gain insight through the experiences of working alongside others. We also have the opportunity to engage in conversations with school and divisional leaders implementing the framework in their own organizations.
We know great leaders build great teams because that is what every child deserves. Subscribe to the Leading Collaborative Response podcast and join the thousands of schools seeing success for students through intentional and focused collaborative efforts.
Welcome to Leading Collaborative Response. I'm Lorna Hewson, co-founder and lead learner of Jigsaw Learning.
And I'm Kurtis Hewson. Today, we're joined by members of the leadership team at Sir Wilfrid Laurier School, a middle school located in Southeast Calgary. So I've been raving to you about this school for quite a while, and we're super excited to have these leaders join us, as I've had a chance to be at their school earlier in the year and blown away by the work that's been happening in relation to collaborative response. So before we get to the work, why don't we start with some introductions? We'll go around the room, and if you can just share your name, role, and a little bit of your educational journey of what's brought you to this point at Sir Wilfrid Laurier. I'm going to actually start with Amy. Why don't you start us off?
Yeah, my name's Amy Smith. I am the student services teacher here at Sir Wilfrid Laurier, and I actually was first introduced to collaborative response in my previous division at Clearview Public Schools. And so it was nice to be a part of this team to really launch into its full potential here at Sir Wilfrid Laurier. So new to CBE, but not new to collaborative response.
No, and we've had a chance to interact several times in the past, Amy, so it was a nice surprise to be doing a session at CBE and to see you come through the door that first time. Why don't we go over to Ray?
Hi, I'm Ray Love, and I've been at Sir Wilfrid Laurier School for 9 years, but I've been the humanities learning leader for the past 4 years. I've been on the learning leader team since we have started introducing collaborative response several years ago, and was part of the professional development sessions that the board gave us last year to kind of roll this out a little more concretely than it had been done previously.
Awesome. Thanks, Ray.
That's great. Tanya, how about for you?
Hi, I'm Tanya Dann. This was my first year at Sir Wilfrid Laurier School. I came from a couple different places, but started the collaborative response journey 2 years ago with your sessions for leaders. And I came here as the literacy learning leader to support Literacy Whole School, which wonderfully connects with all of the collaborative response work that we've been doing.
Excellent. Thanks, Tanya. And Andrea, how about over to you?
Hi, I'm Andrea Petroni, principal at Sir Wilfrid Laurier School. This is my second year here as principal. I was fortunate enough to work with a fantastic learning leader team last year to get the ball rolling with collaborative response. We attended the sessions provided by you through the area, and then continue to build on that work with our new learning leaders with Tanya and Amy this year. And so it's just been a really great journey watching how collaborative response has really improved both the teaching and learning at Sir Wilfrid Laurier.
That's excellent. Well, it's said I haven't met you before, so this is my first opportunity to be able to learn a little bit more about what's happening at your school. And as we mentioned, Kurtis has been raving, so love to be able to hear a little bit more. So we would love to be able to start with giving our viewers and listeners a little bit more information around Sir Wilfrid Laurier School. So what are some of those background pieces that we need to understand about your school?
Size, amount of students, those kinds of things, grades.
Who'd like to take that on?
I can answer those pieces because I already had to this morning, but also that in the podcast. So Sir Wilfrid Laurier is we are a grade 6 to 9 middle school. We have approximately 500 students. We have a large percentage of English learning as an additional language students. We have, I would say, roughly 30 to 40 students with IPPs. And we are in the southeast community of Radisson Park. Our students, because we are a traditional learning center, our students, it is an alternative program, are bused in from other neighborhoods, but we also have students that are directly come from Radisson Park as well.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I was going to add in, which is unique to this population, is it's a high immigrant population, or as well first generation Canadians. So a lot of that demographic as well.
Excellent. So Amy, I want to actually go to you first as we start to dig into the collaborative response work. You mentioned having engaged in the work in a previous school division. As you came into CBE and specifically to Sir Wilfrid Laurier School, what were some of the things that you saw right away within the school that you felt lent itself well to the infusion of collaborative response?
I think the thing that really meshes for collaborative response is the timetabling. It's the delegation, and it worked well in my previous school. And so Andrea this year really was able, and I know you did an episode already on timetabling, but the timetable and the collection of grade teams is really, really important to effectively tackle and know your kids really well so that you're overlapping. And when I say timetable, I mean like that the teachers are teaching the same cohorts of students, because it allows them to really know their students. And then it really provides that opportunity to have a greater understanding of where we can grow and where we can like use that information to our best of our understanding to support all their learning needs.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Amy. And it's actually the thing that stood out to me initially as well, is how things were established timetable, but with a through line through it. So I am going to make sure in the show notes that we include the timetable overview resources that Andrea had shared and developed through a conversation with her. But Andrea, in that conversation, you talked about the timetable actually being the one thing, and there's lots of contributing elements for sure, but probably the single most critical element of how the collaborative response efforts are really having impact. So I would love to turn it back over first to Andrea to kind of explain what's behind that statement, and then for any one of you to share, how does your timetable allow the collaborative response? And let's get really specific. Viewers are going to want to know, when do you have collaborative team meetings? Is there time for grade level teams to plan? What does that look like? Andrea, why don't you start us off, and then we'll just turn it over to everybody.
So I think the timetable has been one of the biggest or the most important factors in creating a collaborative culture here at Sir Wilfrid Laurier. I think we did, when we looked at the timetable this year, we did discuss it quite a bit as a staff. I think it was really important to bring in teacher voice, but to also explain to them the non-negotiables. And that conversation started off in a conversation about what do we value. And so as a staff, it was determined that we value relationships and we value collaboration. Those are also my two non-negotiables. And I think where I place my value system is around relationship and collaboration. And so it was very important for us to create a timetable where we could ensure that teachers had time to collaborate with each other, with instructional partners, where we had opportunities. So in our timetable, every 5th Friday, we have grade teams that have that whole morning to collaborate and plan together. So that's instructional and grade teams, and having really tight grade teams. And I do believe that if I'm going to say to the staff, if I'm going to stand up in front of them as a leader and say relationships and collaboration are the most important things to me as a leader, and from what I'm hearing as you as staff, then we need to make sure that the time, the resources, and support are provided to teachers, and that time is built into the timetable. Because as much as we would like to think that teachers can have all this time before school and after school to do this work, it's not necessarily realistic for everybody. And so I think it is very important to build that into your timetable so that that work can happen.
So I want to go to Tanya then. For that, we've mentioned collaboration and relationships. Let's go to relationships first. And at a middle school, the relationships that the adults and the learners have are so critical. What have been some things that have happened this year in the timetabling that has ensured a chance for deeper relationships amongst learners and teachers by the reduction in the amount of teachers that a single student will engage with in a semester? What does that look like?
So I wasn't here last year, but I have seen the timetable from the previous year. And I think it's not uncommon to lots of timetables in middle schools where there were 7 periods plus a homeroom. And so kids were transitioning between classes 8 different times in the day. That's a lot of transitions. And middle school students are not super awesome at transitions sometimes, which also creates quite a bit of time wasting, really. Transitioning out, transitioning in. And then that's a lot of teachers for a kiddo to be able to connect with. And so the middle
they're
school
set up as purely, I'm a science teacher,
science, math,
teacher,
language, social studies, music, all of those things. So this model that has one teacher teaching math and science in a double block to one group of students, and a teacher teaching language arts, social studies, or humanities model to another group of students. Then you have 2 teachers who are doing all of the core. And then I think that is a critical piece. You still have the opportunity to have different relationships. It's not a generalist. However, it is providing a great opportunity for teachers to really get to know those students. I think another really key component to that is structuring where classes are in the school. And so Andrea has done a pretty great job of being able to make sure that teams, so the math science teacher, the humanities teacher, are close to each other, physically close to each other in classrooms, because that creates great opportunities for quick conversations in the hallway about a kiddo and how they're doing. So-and-so is having a hard day. So-and-so is, really struggling this morning. So-and-so did a great thing, whatever. And so those kind of informal conversations and collaborations happen when you have 2 teachers who are really focused on one instructional group or 2 instructional groups, and that is their focus. I think that has created a great opportunity. I think that also comes to play in any of our collaborative response meetings or any of our team planning meetings, because you have these tight teams of people who are focused solely on this one group of students. And so they really can work together to kind of unpack needs and then work to support those needs together.
So if we look specifically at the logistics, if I recall correctly, there would be typically 4 classes at each one of your grade levels. So 4 grade 6 classes, 4 grade 7, 4 grade 8, 4 grade 9. In that, there would be, for those 4 classes, 2 humanities teachers and 2 what you referred to as SMATH, science and math.
Yeah.
SMATH teachers. So essentially, at a grade 9 level, let's say, for instance, there's 4 core teachers who are providing everything for those 4 classes, with 2 people doing humanities, 2 doing science math, correct?
Yes. And in our school, there would also be a phys ed teacher for each of those groups that would be part of that group. And then either, depending on the semester, French or band or music, depending on the grade level. And so your team is nice and tight. I will say, though, that even though this kind of works out to be a nice little number, you could still do this with a lot more students in a bigger school. It doesn't have to be a smaller school. You could do this with 8 at each grade level, and it would still be effective and work.
So one of the things that stood out to me then within that is if you had a single classroom, let's call it 7A. 7A would have their humanities teacher and their science and math. But then through the timetable, we ensure those 2 people have some common prep time.
Yes. So they would switch, they would share a group, and then they have common prep time. So in our building, our teachers have daily preps. And so their daily preps always align with their curricular partner. So the humanities partner and the SMAC partners with theirs would align.
Right. So not by class, but by the 2 teachers teaching humanities at grade 7, and then the 2 teachers teaching math for that particular grade level.
Yes. And I think that it could work either way. But it's that common prep time where that work can happen throughout the day, whether it be informally or in a formal time period where you're sitting together and meeting during that prep. I think it's that constant connection that whether it's formal or informal, and it really just makes it a lot more manageable when you are dealing with, you have 60 kids-ish as a team that you're managing, as opposed to another model where you might have 120 kids that you're trying to support. And it's just, it's quite simply, you can do better with 60 than you can do with 120.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, the timetabling and the scheduling for your collaboration is such a big hurdle. It actually is often, when people are introduced to collaborative response in the beginning, that can often be the first, I don't know if we can do this because we can't find the time in our schedules. So that's fantastic that you have been able to get to that place of figuring out the scheduling.
Oh, just wait. We've just started.
Well, I'm wanting to ask the next thing about the collaborative team meeting. So
No, we're not even ready yet. So
Okay.
when we talk about the layers of team and the collaborative planning, the collaborative team meeting, school support, case consult, and for those that might be watching or listening that are unfamiliar, we'll throw some resources in to explain that further. There's actually 3 levels of collaborative planning that I would suggest are happening. One is the common preps that have been established just for natural collaboration.
And that's subject area focus,
but still at a grade level. So it's 2 people teaching the exact same curriculum to get a consistent learning structures and sequences going. Ray, I'd love for you then to share the every 5 weeks. Now, those 2 SMAth and those 2 humanities, they come together to engage in some grade level planning, a full half day every 5 weeks without subs. Share with us how that looks, brilliant. And then your role as a lead within that, because you're one of the leads, and I know the leads play a really important factor in those planning times.
Yeah, so on that 5th week where we have our planning time, so this year I taught grade 9. So during that time, the grade 9s would rotate between some of the gym teachers, the French teacher, and actually Tanya, who was helping do one of them. So they would do like a phys ed, a health, a bit of a French/flex class with the French teacher. And then Tanya was doing a bit of a power up with some kind of social emotional and kind of non-academic learning or non-curricular learning, I guess I would say. For us in grade 9, we found for collaborative response, it was very helpful because we would have our collaborative response meeting. We would come up with some often kind of things we wanted to implement grade wide. And then during those Fridays, we would actually have the opportunity to figure out how that would look. For grade 9, for example, the most recent one, I guess, was we were looking at our grade 9 is not taking like accountability for stuff. So we were focusing a bit more on like that well-being. So then that gave us a time on the Friday. We came up with an idea of how they could present some learning to their grade 6 buddies, how that would look. We created kind of a template. We created an email to contact our grade 6s, have that kind of go forward, and then everybody's on the same page. We also, for us, we were able to do a lot of cross-curricular work that met with like our SDP goals, and as well as some other well-being work, which often was the focus of our collaborative response meetings, which would take place within our homeroom time. So I think having those 5 Fridays just really helps you, like whatever strategy you're trying to implement, as a result of those collaborative team meetings. It gives you like a bit more of a time to be, I guess, accountable, like look at your collaborative response notes again. Like we said, we were going to implement this grade team project strategy, and now this gives us some time to actually enact that and have everybody be on the same page. Sometimes it wouldn't work out timing wise perfectly, so we would meet during common preps to have that happen. But I think really it did help make sure that you were doing what you said you were going to do as a result of the collaborative response meetings.
Yeah, and
That's
it really stood out to me of not only using that planning time to be responsive to what we were identifying, but then also being really intentional with some instructional task design as well. Because when I was in your building that day, the cross-curricular projects that were occurring were fantastic ways to connect. Could I ask somebody to share what an example of one of those might look like, Tanya? If you're able to share, and the idea of it really
I can too, because we did quite a few.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to very quickly though speak to kind of what the data had said in when we did some of our data gathering. So the grade 9 team had probably the most amount of collaborative opportunity because the entire grade 9 team actually had common preps. And so they had a lot of common preps plus their Fridays. And I think that one of the results of that was an immense amount of cross-curricular work and really, really thoughtful, engaging task design. And I think that when we look at our data and our well-being data in particular, we noticed that the 9s had a really large jump. They went up really significantly. And I think, upon reflection of looking at that, that work, the level of collaboration that the team had allowed the team to create really fantastic cross-curricular engaging tasks. And the result shows in our data that really sees those grade 9s well-being well-being responses really go just really impressively up, which is not always necessarily what we normally see in grade 9. Yeah. And so I think that I just wanted to kind of connect back to really what the evidence has shown us around the effect of this amount of collaboration that has gone on. But I will let Ray speak to the tasks.
Yeah, if you can give us an explicit example of what one of those might look like.
So we did about 4 that were fairly cross-curricular, not every subject every single time, but the one that did include kind of the math, science, social, LA was we did a project based on the science unit on space. And what we did, it had been previously created by my coworker who's the science teacher, and then we adapted it this year to work better with our kids as well as some of the SDP strategies we were implementing. So we listened to a podcast called The Red Frontier, which talks about Mars exploration. Simultaneously in ELA and in science, the students read a variety of articles about Mars exploration, kind of the disadvantages, the advantages, the potential hazards, and so on. And we were working really a lot on annotation skills. So that one was kind of led us into some nonfiction annotation. And then in our project was the kids had to basically design using math and science a habitat that could be used on Mars. And then for the LA social science piece, they had to also write a piece about like to what extent do they believe exploration to space is a good use of resources. So then they could include some of the science vocabulary, LA obviously written paragraph, and then for social studies using some of that inquiry space skills. They only got to use the resources we provided to them just to kind of help keep things a little bit more simple. And for that week, we actually kind of gave them 4 days, and we kept them in their homeroom classes, and the teachers rotated because there was just so much material. We thought it would be too much to kind of move up and down. So they had the week to work on it, write their paragraphs, get feedback, make their habitats. They actually physically built the habitats along with doing, I'm not great with math, but all the calculations of the area and whatnot. And then we displayed them in the library. They did some peer evaluation and peer feedback and kept it on display for some of our other grades to come check out. The kids all did great. Like every single kid finished a project within that week. We had a couple modified projects for some kiddos who had missed some of the science curriculum in particular, or math curriculum. And the like really high quality, I would think, in the end, and a lot of buy-in. The kids really enjoyed the building part, and then we also got some writing out of it. So a little bit all over the place with what that was produced within it. I thought it was a very successful project this year.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
great.
again, showing a great product. And again, we talk about in that collaborative planning layer, where you're doing things that should impact all students, but you're probably not looking at individual students necessarily. We're looking at connections to curriculum, assessment, and thoughtful task design like you're doing. So Common Prep, every 5th Friday, half a day to meet in your teams. But then there's also early dismissal Fridays where there's opportunities for PLCs, which are also connected to this. So this is the third layer of collaborative planning that's there. Can someone kind of give us a real quick synopsis of the PLC, and then we'll get to the collaborative response/team meeting, which is also happening on the Friday afternoons with an early dismissal. Let's start with the PLCs. Can someone share that?
I can speak to that if you want, or would you like to, Andrea?
No, you can go ahead. I was just going to, I was just going to mention that with the PLCs, because that was a big shift that we had from last year to this year in terms of our PLC Friday afternoons. And one of the pieces that we did last year when we looked at collaborative response is that we found that in our actual collaborative response meetings, a lot of our teachers surfaced strategies and supports that perhaps they didn't have necessarily the capacity to their understanding to enact in classrooms. So that could be anywhere from tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 supports. And so we felt that it was really important this year that if we were noticing that teachers could say, okay, these are strategies that we need to be using, that they also needed to have the ability to enact that purposefully in classrooms. And so we kind of shifted our thinking around our PLCs to really targeting it towards what teachers were identified as pretty much their own learning needs in order to support teachers or in order to support students. And so that was one big shift, and we've seen huge gains in that in terms of being able to support all students with tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 supports, and really giving our teachers the ability and the confidence to utilize these strategies in their classes.
And you know what really stood out to me is I thought it was a really healthy balance of what are we hearing from our teachers and what is our data suggesting as well, that we can be responding to both. So Tanya, share with us then what the PLC structure of this looked like. We'll be right back to continue this episode. There are two things that we know. The first is that implementing and sustaining collaborative response in schools is complex work. The second is that educators love a bargain. For this year's Black Friday, Cyber Monday, we are planning something to address both of these realities. We are slashing the price of our Supporting Collaborative Response on-demand workshop bundle by 75%.
For 4 days only, our Supporting Collaborative Response workshop library is going to be available for only $50, reduced from our regular price of $200. So what do you get for only $50? You get a series of on-demand workshops, each focused on a particular aspect of collaborative response. There are currently 9 workshops, including an overview of collaborative response, but we plan to continue to add to the library over time.
Topics like creating focus for collaborative planning without micromanaging your teams, and 10 considerations when refining and utilizing your continuums of support are just 2 of the titles currently available. These 20 to 40-minute workshops are facilitated by myself or Lorna Hewson and include numerous resources and samples. They have been recorded so that they can be played and replayed as often as you wish. There is no expiration date for these workshops, so access them when it works best for you. In the time it takes to eat your lunch, you can engage in one of the workshops. This amazing offer is only available to our JL Insiders email list, so don't delay.
Join the JL Insiders by going to jigsawlearning.ca and clicking on the link at the bottom of the page to become a JL Insider. You can also go to bit.ly/J, lowercase insider to sign up. That's bit.ly/J, lowercase insider.
On November 29th, our JL Insiders will receive the exclusive code to access the entire workshop library for only $50. That's $150 in savings off our regular price. Check out the website jigsawlearning.ca to learn more and join the JL Insiders to have a chance at this incredible Black Friday Cyber Monday deal. And now back to our conversation.
So really what, as Andrea said, really what it looked like was an opportunity to do capacity building. And so the decision on kind of where and how to focus that really came from a couple different places. One was the data and what our SDP has said.
And I'm just going to interrupt there for a second. For those that are not familiar with Calgary Board of Education acronyms, and there's a couple, SDP is the School Development Plan. Sorry to interrupt, Tanya.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. So one of the major focuses that our data identified was around literacy. And so that was a huge piece of building capacity in that, and actually kind of going back to just building understanding of what literacy data is telling us about our students and about our learners, and how that information would impact our practice. And so by kind of, first of all, starting there, we were able to peel back some layers and figure out, well, if it's impacting my practice this way, well, how am I going to do this? And how should I do that? Mm-hmm. And so that kind of revealed some areas of capacity building as well. In addition to that, we also looked at what was coming out of our collaborative team meetings, our collaborative response team meetings, where there were issues that were coming up, and where we could observe that there were some areas of growth. So when it came to tier 1 and tier 2 instruction. So for example, we had some issues with students not really being great at talking to each other, and students really struggling with working together, and teachers struggling with meeting, like, how do I meet all of these literacy needs in a classroom? How do I support students with low literacy in a classroom of 30 kids? And so at that point, we decided that learning about the power of collaborative classrooms would be a really good point for teachers to kind of build some capacity in. So then we did professional learning in the superpowers of collaborative classroom and how to utilize those structures to support the needs of all students, and meet some of those needs that were coming to the surface in our collaborative response team meetings. And so That's kind of really how we did a lot of our PLCs. There was a little bit of more traditional PLCs mixed in there. We did some calibration and brought some of our annotations to the table and looked at what kids were giving us and what was the next step and developing that way. But we did, and then there was also teachers indicating that they were looking at the data they were seeing in their classes that there was issues with vocabulary. And so they requested to do some more learning in that area of vocabulary and morphology. So we did some additional work around that, again, building capacity, whole school, and doing that work. And when we look back on it, again, I'm looking at kind of our evidence and our data. We've seen massive growth in the areas that we've worked on building capacity in. And then when we ask teachers about their feelings, they also feel that they've had a lot of growth and they have shifted their practice in those areas. And so I think that that's actually one of the critical pieces of the collaborative response model is we do have to, I think, continually bring in that continuous improvement and work really actively to build capacity in areas that are being identified as a need, because not every teacher holds all of the knowledge. And so sometimes we do need to reach out and pull in some of that knowledge and expertise and kind of have us all rise up together and our capacity together.
I think this really speaks to that connecting all of the pieces, and that, when we identify an area, either within our team meetings, that we need to do some learning, that we actually do that learning as a team through our professional learning, and that we actually are connecting the real need of teachers in the moment with our professional learning, as opposed to sometimes schools will say, well, we have a professional learning day coming up. What topic should we do? But this is actually, you're looking at your data, you're looking at what teachers are saying in their meetings, you're looking at what are some of the issues that are coming forward in our collaborative team meetings that we do need to do a little bit more learning around. And therefore, using that time in that way is really impactful, really connecting it to real life experience. That's really exciting.
And I think that the really awesome part of it is that usually what would happen is there'd be a need. We would, have the professional learning, teachers would go in and apply that, and they would see results. And those conversations about what did we do to make this shift happen, that are in those collaborative team meeting notes really helped teachers circle back to be able to recognize. And I think that what that has done is created a really high sense of collective efficacy in this building.
Yeah. Well, you've talked about then the connection between the multiple types of collaborative planning, the collaborative response team meetings that you have. But Amy, I'd love to go to you now, because there's now that next layer around the school support team of we're building up really exceptional classroom practice through everything you've talked about. But there's always going to be some students that we need to support a little bit more. So can you describe what that layer looks like? Who's involved when you're meeting? Because I know you play a really key role in that as well.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say too, it's so nice hearing from my colleagues speak so highly. It just reminds me of like my coaching days. Like when you said that we were a star team, I'm just like beaming over here listening to Ray talk about projects and Tanya talk about PLC, and knowing the work that Andrea has done behind the scenes to clear that space to launch it. It reminds me of what we say, like if everyone's just doing their job, and I don't even know all the ins and outs of each of their roles, it just functions so beautifully. And so that's like a huge conduct of this team, like functioning so beautifully together. But yeah, speaking about SLTs, so SLTs are student learning team meetings that we have, or we have our school team. So this is our administration team. Our student support services is joined with the leadership team, and we sit around once a week. And in that meeting, which is about an hour long, we try and bring forth like the things as leaders that we're seeing that have been brought forward from teachers, from students, from concerns of parents, things that we kind of are knowing that we're having to sit down and probably apply more level tier 3 or 4 supports to help out with that. And so we meet once a week, and it's usually at the beginning of the week. For us, it was on Mondays. That was really effective. And we come together, and then we actually, during that time too, we look at the collaborative response notes from our grade teams. So we pull through them, and we try and do that a little bit beforehand, so we have time to collectively look and see what the needs were brought forward to address. And if there was individual students that were identified on there, I can typically follow up with the teachers or speak directly to the teachers. A lot of the time it happened very informally, as it was like such a busy time. So they would email me after their collaborative response meeting, and they would just say, hey, like, this name was brought up, here's the concern. And like I said, we would still collectively go in and look at those notes. It was nice to have a leader on each of the teams. And some of the teams, like the grade 9s, had 2 leaders. So it was kind of nice because the leaders, we also collectively met on Thursday mornings. So that was a good time to also bring forward further information that they noticed in the collaborative response meetings that they hosted. So it was nice because that was where it all kind of bled in well together. They all meshed together. Everything was really intertwined and connected. So yeah, so if they brought it forward or another leader did, it was easy to bring up in the meeting, and then we could talk about the actions that we would draw forward from there.
And then there are situations where from that conversation, you may determine that, for Lynette, we need to have a meeting about just Lynette. So let's get everyone who's teaching Lynette part of that. What does that conversation look like, and when does it happen?
Yeah, so if it was like brought forward, typically I would bring it up in our meeting together, and then I would just say, we would collectively talk, like, does this warrant an SLT? And a lot of the times it did, if their name was solely brought forward, and then that's how we would set up a team. And at the beginning of the year, Andrea worked with me to include 2 times that would be outside of our planning time. So it was either Wednesday mornings we met, or Thursday after school. And it was only about a half hour, but anyone who taught that student, I would give them a prep sheet. It would give them to include things that they're seeing in that class of that student. Sometimes I would ask for academic work if it had to do with like learning disabilities for that student, or if we were suspecting something like that. And then we would all meet together for about half an hour to decide what the next steps were and what we were commonly seeing. Because sometimes it was just like, if one teacher was just seeing that issue, then we could kind of work and smooth out things. But collectively, if we're seeing the same thing across the board, like maybe this is a case where we have to move forward with ed psych assessments, or there's some other intervention that's I need to apply for an outside school service for them.
Mm-hmm. And then that connects in the Calgary Board of Education to the ALT, or the area learning team, of now we might need to access that divisional support to get some external supports from some tier 4 supports, either from the division or outside agencies.
And individualized for that particular student. Yeah.
I'm like blanking on the name that Andrea, what is it called? Our Monday meeting. That one's ours.
Yeah. So I was kind of giggling inside. School support team. So
there's so many.
What Amy described at the very beginning there was our school support team, not our SLT. So that's our school support team. And then from our school support team is sometimes that's when we discuss what needs to be more of an SLT.
Thank you.
And there may be times, I would assume, where, okay, we're not ready for an SLT at this point. Amy, let's task you that you're going to go into this classroom and do a little observation this week, or work with the teacher on something particular.
Yeah. And sometimes it was that, like, if their name was just brought up in the student, I always say the acronym, so I want to make sure I say it right, Andrea, the student support team meeting. A lot of the times it was like, oh, I need to connect with the parent, or I need to go do an observation, or I'm going to have a conversation with the teacher. And then sometimes it didn't even evolve into an SLT. There was actually a point this year where we felt like we were SLTing our students, or our student learning team, that's with the teachers that teach that student. It was almost becoming too heavy. And so we had to even re-talk about okay, what is the initial problem? And then is there something have we been trying those strategies? And we actually created a flow chart at the beginning of the year that we even had to go back and reference ourselves on our leadership team to say like, okay, there is a flow chart to this to like understand if it even needs to, because time is really precious in the teacher world. And so we don't want to collectively bring you in all the time for meetings. So sometimes it was just a matter of going in to support the initial concern, and then not necessarily having to evolve to an SLT or an ALT further. But those steps were all outlined. And a big part was educating our staff on that flow as well, is knowing how and when to initiate all of these things.
So your school has shared your team meeting overview and that flow chart. We'll make sure that it's in the show notes for people to be able to access as well. So you've talked about, or we've talked lots about that puzzle piece of collaborative structures and processes, and you shared a number of different structures that are there, the intertwining between. We've talked about the data and evidence, and Tanya, we're going to come back to it here in a little bit with a specific question, because I know you've been really key within the school of some of the data and evidence collecting and sharing, but showing how it connects. Could we have someone share what has the continuum of supports work look like so far in the school, and what are you seeing as some next steps as you move into a new school year?
I can talk about that. So we just started developing our own like local continuous supports this year. So last year we were just using the one primarily from CBE as our reference point. So this year on one of our Fridays prior to one of our collaborative response meetings, we pulled some of the examples that was provided by you of other schools, and we had about 6 examples, and we just had staff go through them, and we worked on putting together some ideas of what should be included within our own. So we just did that through the use of a Padlet where people could put their ideas for tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 primarily supports, referencing CBE ones, referencing other schools, like what ones are we actually using kind of on a regular basis? What ones are we maybe interested in using? And so on. And then myself and another learning leader, we went through it and kind of following your model. We used the teardrop to help so that we had our tier 1 be kind of more those less, right? But ones that were consistently happening within all classrooms. We collapsed those into, I think we came up with 7 or 8 that we were going to focus on. And then tier 2 was right now just a list of all things that were happening, and then worked with Amy and Andrea and Tanya a bit on kind of putting in some of those tier 3, tier 4 ones that are a bit more system based. For us, our next steps are definitely going to be, right now we have it just kind of lumped. We don't have it in like numeracy, literacy, well-being. We have it just all together. And I think dividing that within our continuous supports is our next steps. And then also adding in, I think, hyperlinks, because a lot of the ones that we found that were very user-friendly had hyperlinks to resources for anybody who was unfamiliar with a certain strategy. So that would be our next step, part of our next steps as well, so that any teacher who's unfamiliar and perhaps there isn't an opportunity professional development around that can be guided to resources to help them implement a strategy.
And I really like that in time, how we can make a direct alignment to the priorities in our school development plan. Again, it's showing the through line of this is how we're collaboratively responding to the key priorities that we've established in our school improvement plan.
Exactly, because then it kind of acts as a working document too, right? It doesn't, whenever somebody has a new idea or we have a new goal in mind, we can adapt and change that continuous supports to help teachers.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So we have a sentence stem that we would love for you to be able to think about. I think it would be great to go around the room with this one, if that's okay. So here we go. Finish this sentence, and maybe we'll start with Andrea this time. And
I'm going to request, can we end with Tanya? Because I think this question is going to align back to some of the data and evidence
that we wanted to come back and talk about anyways. So here's your statement. As a result of collaborative response, we have seen
I think for me, my biggest piece that I've seen, and I know I talked about this a little bit when we looked at the creation of the timetable. I would say that we've seen improved teacher well-being, and we know that when our teachers are well, that the teaching and learning is better. And so it is, I think, for me, really nice to see the staff feeling supported, working together, working in collaboration. And you can feel that energy in our building. And staff have expressed that they appreciate the fact that they're not alone, that they're doing this work together, that again, they feel supported, they've been given the time. We're seeing greater student success, less office referrals, which I also think is an indication that our students are doing better. And so I guess that would be it: teacher well-being and student learning.
Okay, before we go to Amy, I can reinforce it. When I talked to your staff, one thing that came up consistently was there's a feeling of calm, which I think speaks to that, not only the student success, but the teacher well-being as well. How about for you, Amy? And then we'll go to Ray.
Yeah, very similar to Andrea. I would say it has an improved school culture, and that has a big component of wellness. So even thinking about the PLCs, it's responsive. It's not just a top-down model. Everything is connected. It makes sense. And we want it to make sense. And so even when things don't, it's like a good time to have those conversations and around that. And then the teachers can show up the way they need to and the students. So I'd say like overall, that wellness piece is huge, but it's improved our school culture as well. The sense of belonging, the safety, the willingness and wanting to be here as well.
That's
Thanks, Amy.
beautiful.
Ray?
And Ray?
So I'll go a little different just to mix it up a bit, but I'd say we've seen increased, I guess, cross curriculum projects and increased teacher collaboration. And I think that has really strengthened teacher relationships, because there's more frequently teachers are intentionally meeting together. And then kind of just as a result of that planning time, you're also getting more discussion about students and student learning as a result.
So Ray, you've been at the school probably the longest out of the group here. Would you say that the formalized collaboration that's been put into place with a lot of intentionality has had an impact on the informal, the hallway conversations, the after school?
I think so. I think especially this year, having kind of like that smaller cohort of teachers teaching those core subjects, because then you only have those 3 other people that you consistently are trying to meet up with in order to team plan or plan for any other kind of like well-being or homeroom. So I think the timetable has been huge for that, because last year, if they wanted to do anything cross-curricular, there's like 8 teachers that needed to be involved who did not have common prep time. So having that common prep time really has helped. And then also it's just easier when you have something going on. You might touch base in the morning more than you would if you were not engaging in some sort of a cross-curricular project or some sort of like collaboration, which then just opens the door, I think, for more conversation about whatever is going on within the classroom.
Awesome. So Tanya, I purposefully went last to you, and that is because you and I share an affinity for data, and the being able to have some really specific numbers and quantitative and qualitative data to back things up. So how would you respond to that question, knowing that you've really looked at some of the specific data coming in? As a responsive collaborative response, we have seen what happen in relation to data. We'll be right back to continue this episode.
This question is brought to you by WeCollab. Designed by educators for educators, this comprehensive digital system aligns with the foundational components of collaborative response. Moving from conversation to action, WeCollab empowers classrooms, schools, and systems to provide the very best response for each and every child by informing action-based decision-making with data and evidence supporting student success.
And now back to our conversation.
In relation to data, okay. So I think that we have seen, I could talk about a million different data points. Honestly could. So I think that we could talk about, I think the teacher collective efficacy piece is just critical. I think that our data, that there was a data point that asked whether or not teachers felt that the school had improved in the last couple of years. That response was 100%. And like
And
that's
I
pretty much,
believe
I've
when
never
you had
seen
asked that question previously, wasn't it around 65%?
5.
Yeah.
So last year was 65, this year is 100%.
Wow.
When we asked teachers whether or not students had access to the supports that they needed,
Mhm.
I think it was 98%. It was very high. Again, something I've never seen before in any of those responses. So I think that that speaks really highly to the sense of collective efficacy.
Mhm.
I think that and to the ability and the access students are having to tier 3 supports in the building, which is also, fairly uncommon at a middle school or junior high level. So I think that that is a huge part of the data pieces. When we look at student achievement data, um, around literacy, we're seeing, really strong, immense, like ridiculously good growth. Really, I mean, we're talking upwards of 25 to 30% improvement um, for vocabulary, for reading comprehension. So really high that, and that I think is really speaks to the teams really being on the same page and having those consistent collaborations and conversations and being able to do that co-planning with the lens of literacy, with the lens of improving these areas. I think that when we look, again, I spoke to about the well-being data being so strong for the nines. I think that, when we reflected on why are the nines here and the sevens maybe aren't quite there yet. And I think that when we look at that, it is around the nines were rock star collaborators. Um, they were really focused on the task design. They really ran with the literacy work that we were doing. And I think that we see that in the fact that students are able to feel connected. They had great tier 2 supports in the classroom tier 1, but also great and improved tier 2 supports. So students were able to access the learning and engage in the learning and connect with the learning in a way that, maybe that they hadn't before, or that we're still working on developing in some of the other teams. So I think that the data is really strong in
Mhm.
showing that. But I also think there's also that perception data. And I think, Kurtis, you got, to the root of a lot of that in your interviews when you came and talked to staff. And I think that perception data is that teachers understand and get it. They understand how all these pieces play together. They understand that collaborative response is not just a team meeting we have once a month, that it is about creating an ecosystem, really, of meeting student needs and student success, and that there is this kind of everything has a part and it's balanced.
Mhm.
And I think that, a huge part of that success is because Andrea has really managed to kind of put her money where her mouth is, so to speak, and create the structures, and then also staff to support those structures and staff to support that ability to support tier 3 needs, because again, that's a huge piece of it as well. And our tier 3 data is looking pretty great too. So that's, all of it is looking pretty awesome.
Wow, that's really amazing. And for you to be able to see those results, especially, those are significant numbers when you say 20 to 30% improvement. That is amazing. So
In some
congratulations
areas.
on all ends. That's really great. So we have one more question for you, and I'm not sure who wants to answer it or if we want to
Let's
just throw
just throw
things
it
out.
out and whoever's
Yeah.
ready.
So our last question is this, and it's a little bit tricky, so I'll give you a moment to think about it. If you knew then, in the spirit of if you knew then what you know now, What advice would you give to your past self in relation to this work? So you know so much more at this point in your journey. What advice would you give to yourself if you knew that already?
Your 2020.
I know I'm probably, I'm probably complicating it, but
I can start. I know maybe some other people might want to pop in. So I think starting this journey at the start of last year, and I know, and I'm just going to speak with Ray because she was on us at that start of that journey. I think last year, for various reasons, we weren't where we are at this year. And I think a lot of it was we really focused on collaborative response, was that collaborative response meeting. And even though we were doing all the other things, we didn't really package it in a way to staff that collaborative response is not the collaborative response meeting. Collaborative response is a way of being in the building. And so I think really making those intentional connections for staff so they see the through line between all the meetings. And again, that not only as leaders we have the understanding, because I still think there is a misconception that collaborative response is that one meeting, that collaborative response is a way of being, and sharing that out with the staff that way.
Thanks, Andrea.
I can kind of add on to what Andrea had said as well. I think, I don't know if this totally answers your question, but goes on with what she had said. I think kind of doing that whole packaging thing was really promoted last year when we engaged in the professional learning, because I think at the start of last year, we're like, oh, we haven't done like really anything with collaborative response. Like we've had some meetings, they went okay, like that was it. And then when we had the opportunity to, I think, sit back and reflect on what was actually occurring in the building, we were able to see like, oh, we actually do a lot of these things. And now we need to kind of roll that out better, explain that better, and how all of these things are intertwined and supportive of each other. And I like that term Tanya uses, it being more of like an ecosystem, as opposed to just like the one-off meeting, which I think was how, when I was first introduced to collaborative response, was how it was rolled out to me. So I think having the opportunity to reflect on like what was occurring in the building was extremely helpful in figuring out how to move it forward more successfully.
Thanks, Ray.
I'll add on one to that as well. I think because again, I started it in a different building, but I think that it really is about understanding that it is an ecosystem, that there's all these things to these pieces that play together. But I think when I look back at it, I think the structures are the critical piece. I think you need to go into the work, build the structures where there's the space so that it all makes sense. And I think that when I look at sort of why it works some places and it's maybe having a little bit more of a struggle in other places, I do think that the structures and the processes are really where to sort of start the beginning. And I think that this meeting student needs is a key value, right? And so if you're, like Andrea has spoke about, looking at those key values at the beginning of setting up your structures and processes, figuring out what are your absolutes, your really big rocks, and then creating your structures and processes around that. And I think that if you can do that, I think rolling this out with staff becomes a whole lot smoother. And it makes a whole lot more sense.
That's great. Amy,
and I was gonna
you get the last word.
And Amy, you're probably the one who has to go back mentally as further than anyone else, because what advice would you give your Clearview self when first hearing of this work, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I think the thing is that like I love the ecosystem metaphor. Tanya, you did a wonderful job. I think it's the education. This is such a complexity. It's not just one thing. It's not just like, here, read this book and now we'll implement it. There's so much overlap. And like, I would say this was my first year where it felt like, even at points where new staff didn't know what was going on, or even staff, like if I didn't know, we'd stop and ask questions and reflect about it, and then like challenge ourselves to move in the right direction. So I think it's knowing what I know now, it's the importance of unraveling this system, is teaching each one of your staff members the importance and implementing it through like prioritizing it within the school and prioritizing each of those stages. Like when we develop that map at the beginning of the year, which you'll share out, it helps lay it out because it's a lot to think about. Even I'm embarrassed, I'll never live down saying the meeting name wrong in this podcast now for us, like our support meeting. And I was just like, oh my goodness. But it's because you get so overwhelmed when you when you don't visually see it. So like, it's just like teaching our students, educating them, simplifying it, helping you understand this complexity so that it's clear and it makes sense. And so I think knowing what I know now, that education piece, and we have to do it all the time. We get new staff all the time. It might look different in a different building, but like if we can all channel the same system that we want to implement, it's really effective. And I think that's what came this year is like if someone didn't get it, we could sit down and explain it, and took the time to do that, and that helped empower them to know exactly the right avenues to take when we had, concerns around students.
Well,
That's incredible.
I do have to say that we've gone longer than we normally do on this podcast, but I think it really is a credit to the great work that's happening at Sir Wilfrid Laurier. And I really have valued the opportunity to have you reflect, but also celebrate the work that's happening for students and staff within your building. So we'll make sure in the show notes to include some of those resources and a way to be able to connect with you if anyone has questions. So with that, thank you so much for your time. And as always, thank you for the great work that you're doing for your staff, your students, and your school community. Very well done.
Thanks so much for sharing your story.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you.
So that was a wonderful time with the school, and they are doing such incredible things and being very thoughtful and intentional in what they're working through as they implement collaborative response.
So there's a few things. And the day I was there, one of the things that they laughed about and said, well, we're just doing what we were shared to do through the books, through the reading, but really it lent itself to the insanely high degree of fidelity that they implemented with, to be able to take each piece and say, okay, but what does this look like within our school? And not well, I don't think that piece would fit for our school. And then picking and choosing which parts of the framework they're wanting to put in. Again, it's the collaborative response framework has been developed, built through a number of years, lots of different schools and experiences that have aided our learning 100%. But this Sir Wilfrid Laurier has really put it together with a high degree of intentionality and consistency through it.
I loved the way that Tanya talked through, and each of the team members talked about this too, about it being an ecosystem, and that really there are so many parts to what we speak about within collaborative response. And as you move into the implementation further and further, you start to see more clearly the connections of all of those pieces. And for them, I think it's pretty clear that they understand how all of those parts function and impact each other, just like an ecosystem.
I was kind of grinning because you and I hear it all, or maybe not hear it, see it all the time, but they vocalized it of, we used to think it was just a meeting. Meeting that we do differently, where now we see it as, no, it's how all of these interactions, structures and processes, how they all fit together, which I think is really, really key. I also loved the idea of, but let's go back to the why, even around the timetable, to say, why? What do we believe is critically important? Our values. What do we value? And then how do we ensure that that is mirrored in things like our timetables, things like the priorities that we are setting? If we've said, for instance, that we value collaboration as an organization, great. Where's it reflected
Yeah.
in
yeah.
how we've set
So
up?
how
and
do we
planned?
evidence that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you do that values-based decision-making, it can actually lead to some difficult decisions. And I know the team has shared before that when they reduced the timetable from 7 to 6, when they said, oh no, you're going to teach science and math for one particular grade level, that was disruption. There was a lot of disruption, hard decisions, and ones that may not have every staff member at that moment celebrating.
But on the other hand, they talked a number of times about getting feedback from staff.
Oh, consistent feedback loops.
And constantly having that opportunity to reflect on their learning and to identify what are some areas that they need to refine or remodel depending on what that need was.
So I think one of the things that also stood out is how they're intentionally gathering data and evidence and always asking, well, what would be the data and evidence that we would look for? Because now,
and what is it telling?
Yeah, think about how powerful that is for our staff to say, through all of this that we've done, we've seen X. We've seen a increase from 65% of our team feeling we're improving as a school to 100%. Now, where we can say we have huge academic gains that's being evidenced in our data for grade 9. Well, one of the key reasons is because of the additional collaboration that just naturally happened for that team. Again, being able to determine the data and evidence to not only inform, but then surface the celebrations becomes so important for sustainability.
Yeah, the other thing that really stood out to me was when Amy was talking about unraveling how we unravel all of these pieces to better understand, and going back again to that allows us to really articulate the why behind the structures and processes that we're using within our collaborative time.
Yeah, absolutely. So as always, we'd love for you to like, share, send this out to a colleague if there's one that you know would be find the conversation valuable. We will add a number of resources into the show notes, some further resources from not only the school, but some other things that we can reference from this conversation to help support you. And as always, we'll ensure that there's a code in the description to receive a discount on the collaborative response text. With that, I want to say thank you so much to the team at Sir Wilfrid Laurier for being able to share and for the great work that they're doing. So with that, we can't wait to be able to explore with you in a future Leading Collaborative Response podcast episode.
See you soon.
For more on collaborative response, visit jigsawlearning.ca or join the JL Insider to receive access to newly added resources and content. Make sure to follow us on social media. Subscribe to the podcast and the Jigsaw Learning YouTube channel to access past and upcoming episodes. Join us again to continue to build your own capacity and leading collaborative response in your context.